Thank you for coming to this week's of Hear Our Voices. We hope to see you next week, but please follow us on our social media platforms. We got YouTube, we got obviously here, depending where you are, become our friend. And we have Instagram and we have TikTok. So follow us on there. And also, please guys, go looking at emails, popping your spam to see if the Section 8 vouchers came to you. It came out on August 1st and August 2nd. I know for sure. I think majority of the people got in. Up to 600,000 people applied, and I'm actually one of the lucky winners of being on the waiting list. So who knows when they're going to call anybody, but please go look in your spam just in case, and make sure you're always looking out for those emails. And if it's going to spam, take it out of spam and then be able to get emails further on. Good luck on your housing journey, and talk to you next time.
Okay, I have a question. It's not written down or anything. It just came from something that you said earlier when you was like you seeked out shelter and they didn't they basically turned their back on you. They was like they don't approve you for shelter.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Because I always thought that like if you go to them and you're like, oh, I need help. I know they don't always give it in the best like of circumstances, but like they would give it to you. I never knew that you could be denied shelter.
Yes. All right. So every shelter system is a bit different, but in New York City they have a thing called we're supposed to be taking people in no matter what. That's what they say. We're a place that if you come here from other states or other places, whatever, they're supposed to take you in. When I was in shelter, this is I want to say my daughter's 2015, so 2016, I believe I was in shelter. At this point, I can't go back, guys. But so when I first went in, I was pregnant. So 2015, technically, is before that. 2015, I went in, and the requirements for shelter to get in is that you have to have an eviction. That's kind of like, yeah, they'll let you in for shelter for sure. And a lot of things I didn't know. That's why also why I wasn't accepted in. You have to have a 2-year at the time. Now it was only 1 year. You have to have a 2-year history of where you were living and why the person doesn't want you living with them. So if you are street homeless, it's much harder to get into shelter if you're a family, because you need to prove the 2-year history. Unless you go into like a soup kitchen or something like that, or an intake worker from an organization saw you, they're not going to qualify you to get into shelter. So I lived in a home, so I had to give them my 2-year history, and the history I had, because I wasn't on no bills or nothing other than my credit cards, was my Capital One credit card information. The thing is that the landlord I was living with, I didn't have a lease. And the second part is that she didn't evict me properly. To let a person to be out of a domain, a place where they're living, because New York City has squatters' rights and things like that, is that they have to evict you. Evict you when you go to court. It takes a long process, all this stuff, and then they tell you, give you a date, and then the marshal's supposed to come if you don't come out in time, things like that. The lady I was living with, I think she was like 90-something, 80-something years old. She wasn't doing that. All she was doing was having people yell at me, call me, curse me out on my phone. And I was like, I don't think it's a safe environment. God, they come to my house when I'm sleeping and I'm pregnant. That's not going to be safe for me and my kid. But PATH did not care about that. They didn't care if they were doing to me or hurting me or anything like that. If that's going to happen. Granted, they didn't hurt me, but they was threatening to do it. And when people threaten enough, eventually they can come and do it. So I didn't want to wait until they actually hurt me, to actually leave. So they told me they would not let me in. And I went there several times, and they just denied me. They said, no, you don't qualify. You have to get an eviction. It's illegal what she's doing. Yes, what she's doing illegal, but my baby's coming any day now, and I have nowhere to stay. And they did not care. I didn't know I could kind of stay there. They could kind of house me and then put me there. But they also give you, example, when you go in and you do all your paperwork, they bring you upstairs. They ask you, do you have an HRA case, which is, the human resources thing. They ask you, can you stay at a friend's house? If you can stay at a friend's house, they'll help pay the rent at your friend's house while they give you a voucher instead of getting your shelter. PATH said they're going to help you, but they want to help as least amount of people as possible. That's what it is. They're supposed to have a right to shelter. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. It's a right to shelter in New York, but they give you conditions on how they can let you in the shelter. I feel like, honestly, being the singles is much easier than being families to me, because, they changed the requirements, so it's a little bit easier now than before. Now you just need a 1-year housing history. When you're bringing like a lease or something like that, or eviction, you're pretty much in. So the first couple of times I did try for that year, I didn't get in. They said you're not eligible, things like that. I ended up going to people's houses, staying couch surfing for a while, and then I ended up renting a room out for 11 months Then me and the lady didn't get along. So I was like, she said she wanted me to be out, and I was like, I want to be out, but I know if I just leave, I have nowhere to go except the street. So I told her, you have to evict me. And it's not the best case to have. It's not good to have on your record. I didn't owe the lady any rent. And not owing her rent actually killed me in the long run because I wasn't eligible for a voucher. So every voucher has different requirements. So because I didn't own her rent, certain vouchers I was not able to get. But because when I went to the second time around, when I went to PATH, they told me I automatically basically in because I had an eviction. And when you have an eviction, they'll take you in. That means wherever you were, that's basically saying the people don't want you. And when you have a letter saying, like, a signed letter from a person who, like your landlord, say, I don't want you there, or something happened, they'll let you in. But if you don't have something like that saying the reason why and it's not safe or it's doubled up, they'll take you back. Like, literally, one time I was going back to shelter, they denied me this time too. I came back from Jamaica. I was there for, like, I want to say 1.5 months, 2 months. They said, where were you? I'm like, I was in Jamaica. At the time I was married. Technically I'm still married, but that's beside the point. And they said, oh, you have to go back there. We'll pay for a plane ticket to go back to Jamaica. We don't want you here, basically. I'm like, I'm a citizen here. They said, but you're a resident there now for 2 months. Technically I can be a citizen of Jamaica, but I'm not at the moment. So it's like, what are you saying? They say you were there for too long. That's basically your permanent address. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I work in New York City. I pay taxes here. I just went there for a certain amount of time. They said, yeah. They had to call my husband. They had to ask him for space. They do everything based on space and things like that. At the time, they had a version of 3 bedrooms in their house. There's really 2 bedrooms or whatever. And then because I had my baby, it kind of helped me out a little bit because it was 4 people down there, 3 bedrooms, and that's not counting me and my baby. So the space, they don't want you doubling up too much, especially for the baby. So it kind of got me in. They said, okay, we'll make you stay in America after a while. They do an investigation period. So to get you qualified, after you give it all the paperwork, they said, I'll call whoever I got to call. So if you give it a letter in saying, I don't want this person here today, they'll call the person and say why, if it's not in the country. Or they'll go to their house. In Corona, they weren't doing this, but before Corona and now, they'll go to your house. They'll go to the person's house and say, why can't this person stay here? They want to look around and see if you could be on that floor, if you could be on somebody's couch, whether that person likes it or not, and they'll deny you based on those things. And it's kind of honestly scary that you want to try to get a place to stay because they think you could fit in that person's place. They'll deny you, which is not fair. So they have different reasons they can deny a person, and a lot of times caseworkers they give you a bunch of paperwork to kind of read. Most folks like myself don't like the reading, so a lot of times people don't know why they actually are that qualified to live in the shelter. So they have to go through this whole process, and sometimes they could go a year or 2 and moving from shelter to shelter because of this problem. So that's the thing too. So I have to think about qualifications and things like that. So hopefully I answered the question. That's a long way of saying it, but yes.
No, I think that was a great additional question. We're gonna skip the second question and the second one because I feel like you answered that. Okay. And go to.
Okay. So, wait, I have a question before we get into it. Okay. When she asked you, like, when you were denied, and you said you were denied for you having an education, right?
Well, not education, for
educated?
For certain things you can get denied for is because, like, example, I want to say they have this back to work program for, like, HRA. Mm-hmm. You can get denied for certain things in there because I'm overeducated for certain things, and they think because you have certain educations, you don't qualify for a lot of things like that. I don't know how to explain it, but certain things you cannot get, but housing, you can still get the housing part of it, which is certain other things they have for, like, helping with careers or building up other skills. You can't get those because you're overeducated.
Do you think that was, like, because of a stereotype people had of homeless people just being uneducated, or?
I think they try to because a lot of people do come in, I'm not going to lie to you, who don't have education at all. So they try to make sure people who actually need those helps get those helps. Even if, say, example, computer engineering. My education is not in that at all, but because I do have higher education, they wouldn't be qualified for that program because they said, oh, I know too much. But I don't know about this thing. I would just go for something totally different. So they kind of weed out people to help people who actually, in their eyes, need that help, and they think others might not need it as much and could be help themselves.
Is that also just like a space thing as well? If it's a class and it's like we want people who really need that education as opposed to like you're educated so you can be something else is added.
Yeah.
Okay, so after being like homeless, how did you emerge your housing crisis and what helped you?
Well, it's kind of a funny idea. Not idea, but funny thing happened. I was on a train, as I do, and I sleep coming to drop my daughter to daycare, and I had a NYCHA application from 2014. I left shelter 2018. And when I got into shelter, I wasn't updating. I didn't know. And they finally told me that you need to update it every 6 months to really keep up to date. I finally was doing that. So I was on the train. This lady saw me. And I was sleeping, as I said before. And she said, "Are you homeless?" I'm like, do I look homeless? Because I'm like, do I smell homeless? Like, is there something about me that's giving you homeless vibes? Like, is it a sign saying, this girl is homeless with her child on the train? Which probably I shouldn't be sleeping on the train, but I do it now and I'm not homeless. So I'm like, I don't know. But she said, "Are you homeless?" I'm like, yeah. And all day I was at work. I was working at a college. Well, yeah, college. And I was thinking, how does she know I'm homeless? This is very weird. So the next day she said, "Do you need help?" basically. And she said, "I know somebody who works in NYCHA." I don't know the lady. I've never seen her get in my life. She said, "I'm going to get you help." And I'm like, I was so shocked and surprised. I'm like, "How do you know I'm homeless?" She said, "Because you were sleeping." And I'm like, nah, God told you that. Because I don't believe no way you're going to tell me I'm just sleeping. I feel like everybody's sleeping in the train. Probably I'm definitely wrong. I could never tell by a person just sleeping in the train that they're homeless. And I had on regular clothes. Like, people who didn't know me, people who knew me didn't know I was homeless until I told them. So I'm like, nah, God just gave you a sign. You just went with it. I'm okay with that. I'm fine. And she said, "I know somebody." I gave her my name. She asked what shelter I was in. She asked me a couple more questions. I gave it to her. I'm like, she said, "I have a friend who's going to help you." And I'm like, okay. I believed it. I was like, what more can I really go for? I'm at the bottom, so I can only go up from here. And then a couple of days, I got a call, got an interview for NYCHA. And that's how I kind of got out of my housing crisis, as you will. And honestly, I've been living there for 6 years. I feel like I'm back in shelter just a little bit because it could just be me and my bias. People in NYCHA, I can't say all. I think I went in with a bias in NYCHA, just like I went in bias in shelter, that I think everybody's just bad. But honestly, there's a lot of people who are caring and hardworking in NYCHA. They kind of, I feel like a lot of times get stuck living there because they're just so used to living in this environment and they think it's okay living here. For some people, it's going to be okay. I feel like when you're older and you live in NYCHA, if you know what that is, it's public housing in New York City. I think when you're older and you have a fixed income, NYCHA is amazing. But when you're a younger person, under a certain age, I feel like it's not the best thing. And also safety reasons, it's not the greatest. People can get slashed, hit. That can honestly happen anywhere in New York City, but when you have a bunch of people who are poor, that tends to happen more often than a neighborhood that doesn't have less people on top of each other, less problems happening. So to me, especially with my daughter living there, and I don't have nobody else with me in my apartment, it kind of, here and go. But I'm very grateful to have a place to stay, and I have a place I could call my own. I always wanted the key. I always wanted a stove. I'm not the greatest cook, but at least it's my stove. It might not get as much love as regular stoves get, but the point is that I use it when I can, and I don't have to only cook in a microwave to make food for me and my kids. So I am grateful. So that's the way I got out of my housing situation and coming out of shelter. I was so excited. Oh my gosh, it was Valentine's Day, before Valentine's Day, whatever, and it was like a whole thing. It went so fast. It's like less than a month. I would say 3 weeks. I saw on the train. I got the call from Section 9, which is NYCHA. They said you can come in and look at the apartment. I was excited. I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening. I made sure they asked me to bring a bunch of paperwork, stuff for your birth certificate, Social Security. At the time, I had my marriage license. I had to bring that. Well, I had it on the computer. I got it printed out. They got it. You had to bring so much stuff. And she said, she said, you have everything. I'm like, I do. I want to get out of the shelter. I made sure I brought everything she needed to make sure, boom, boom, a couple of days. She said, it might take 3 months. I'm like, oh my God, I got to stay here even longer. A couple of days, I got a call. Apartment's ready. I was like, good. It's in Brooklyn. I'm like, yes. I was so ecstatic to move out of there. And I was like, I know the projects, but it's better than being in a shelter. So I just left. But I think I've outgrown it a little bit. I do appreciate where I am and where it had taken me from. When I first moved in, oh my gosh. When I first moved in was a struggle. I didn't have anything. All I had was my stuff from storage. And when they were supposed to give me furniture allowance when I left shelter, but I didn't know that until after. By the time when you leave shelter, they have a thing called the cares case kind of thing. So it's basically a database you go in anybody who's in shelter, they put them in there. They have like I want to say a version of a social security number. So everybody has a number. So me and my daughter, for the rest of our life until we die, we're always gonna have a number, whether it's open or closed. Right now it's closed because we're not in shelter. And if you go to after you leave shelter, you can go to home base, which is kind of charities, CAMBA, those places to kind of help you with other things that you need help with, and they can open up the case there, but it still be the same number, the same person. And no matter when, as I said, no matter when you're dead or alive, that number is going to be your number. And when I moved out, I didn't know I need to have shelter furniture money. And when I left, they said, "Oh, we can't do nothing about it because we left already." I'm like, why didn't you give it to me the money before I left? Like, why didn't you put this? If they actually do a thing in the system to say, "Oh, this person's leaving shelter," they're supposed to actually go with this amount of money. But I had storage, so that was also another problem that they had. They don't like to give you furniture with storage, which I'm like, I have storage, but I don't have no furniture. Like, when I moved out the shelter, they helped get my stuff out of storage. Everything that I had in my room, they brought it to my apartment. I had nothing to sleep on except sheets. They're supposed to give me a blow-up bed. I didn't get that till like days later. I didn't know they were supposed to give that to you. And me and my daughter in February sleeping on the floor. Thank God NYC at the time had heat, because NYC this year didn't have heat. But that year we had heat. You have a comforter, you sleep on the floor. It's not comfortable because the floors are hard. So me and my daughter, I'm closing next to her in the room I'm living in now, but she has her own room. But I would just sleep. I'm like, man, I'm at a shelter, but I'm still crying myself to sleep. Like, this cannot be life. I came from the shelter in a bed to my own apartment on the floor. I had to make up my mind to get it together. And I didn't get my furniture fast. Somebody donated a bed for my daughter, a bed for me. But I also went to the home bases to get, because they also, when I moved out of shelter, they paid for my rent. They're supposed to pay for your rent. For like first month's rent, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't paid. Supposed to be through a one-shot deal with HRA. They didn't do that. And so I had to, even though I just moved in, I was behind in rent because they didn't pay nothing. So it was a whole thing. I had to go to HRA to get help. I had to call a shelter to get them together. It was things like that. It was really, really hard getting in. You think that when you move out, it's going to just be, oh my God, it's the best place. You got your own key. You have a place, you feel hot, like, oh my gosh, I got my own. It's my first time having my own apartment. I feel like it's not a real apartment because I didn't really go out there on my own and get it, but it's still my place. And then you end up in a situation that you're still sad because, especially for your mom, that you didn't make it for your child. Your child really, my daughter really came to real homeless. Like, that's not a good feeling to have to make your child that you love to death come to real, basically having nothing. I had no place to go. All I had was breast milk. God, I have no money to get other than WIC, which is WIC when the women get the stuff from the cities basically to pay for food and stuff like that. I didn't have nothing to give her. I have nothing to offer her. That's why now I work my butt off to make sure she has the best. I probably spoil her way too much than she needs to, and that could backfire on you as a parent. But when you make your child start off in the world with nothing, try to overcompensate as they get older. And but yeah, so that's a little bit of my life story with shelter and how we kind of got through it and how we got into NYC now, and hopefully we can move soon, and we can have a better life for my daughter. But yeah.
I have a question.
No problem.
In what ways do you think that COVID affected the housing situation?
I would say if affected it was very weird. At one point people weren't going to shelter because they were so scared. So example, people with DV problems stayed with the person abusing them, and DV numbers went up, but you didn't see it. Even though it was happening, because it wasn't reported, you can't tell the proper numbers for those things. People will stay in their house with their husband abusing them, their wife abusing them. Kids will stay home with the people abusing them, hurting them, molesting them, because they prefer staying there in a situation than going out there and get COVID and die. We saw the news, we were living it, and it made it seem like it wasn't a crisis. I feel like, honestly, at one point, because people were just not going to shelter, they weren't trying to leave their homes, but the problem is that the crisis were in their home, in their actual house they're living at the time. It made it worse that when COVID cooled down and people was like, okay, I'm not going to die if I go to shelter, they kind of flooded the shelters, I feel like, in a way, and there's a lot of things happening. It kind of helped a little bit, I think, with the vouchers. The vouchers kind of got more loosey-goosey with who they gave it to. Honestly, I feel like people were getting them just like wildfire, because it was like, we don't want you in shelter because COVID is here. We'll just give it to anybody. Some of the eligibility things that they had for city FEPs, they kind of made say no matter if you have an eviction, because they didn't have time to do evictions anyway. So it's like evictions were closed. It's like, you know what, you don't have it, but you're here to get this voucher. Go and do what you got to do. So I think it made it not seen as much in the beginning because people were so scared. When they're able to come out of their apartments and actually leave and go and escape from where they are, they went into shelter, and the numbers definitely, I feel like, spiked. I feel like they can't really tell which ones are which because of the data in that time from 2020 to like, I would say 22-ish. I feel like it's very weird because they can't get a proper data. You just can't. Between people dropping dead and people trying to escape, it's just like it's really hard to get those kind of data. And I think I feel like on the streets, I feel like you couldn't tell us much either. Because even people on the streets, when I went outside, which I went outside very rarely, it looked like a ghost town. It didn't look like New York City. It looked like you were in a town was like in Idaho, New Mexico, like somewhere very rural. New York City, if you look at my videos, I said video everything. I'm like, it's not look like New York City. This looks like you could have tumbleweeds just going down. You could go miles and just not see a person. Yeah. And if anybody ever been to New York City, you can walk in certain areas and you just bump into people because it's so much. It's so crowded. Mm-hmm. Unless you live like in I want to say Queens or probably. I'm gonna start now that much. I can't even tell you, but like more Queens where houses are, you'll see other people. But you like in Manhattan, Brooklyn. I want to say the Bronx. I lived in the Bronx at one point too, a little bit for a couple of months, and it was just a different world. So I think people were just so scared of coming outside. They didn't make it. It didn't seem that bad, but it was that bad. I think that's what it was. But it was a crisis. It was definitely hard. I think also too what helped in a way. But it drove up rent prices. That people moved out of New York City. People weren't trying to stay here because they didn't have space. Like especially with people with kids and they had people in other states, they wasn't staying here. Our numbers were horrible. Between people dying, people moving, and our numbers were still bad. That's still a problem. Like it's crazy. And I lived in a hospital, and I'm like, this is a struggle. I didn't leave my house for one time once, and most I did was put out the garbage. So I'm like, and sometimes the garbage had to just pile up out of it. I was like, put out garbage to get corona. I was like. I guess I'm sticking with the garbage tonight because I couldn't go outside myself. So I think I feel like it was there, but people found a way to kind of go around it by either staying with the people they're with, and because of that also, the sad enough thing is that people were like, example, if mom and dad had a kid and they had to go with grandparents, grandma and grandpa get sick and them dying because they have people in the house who have better immune system than it and them getting disease and them dying. So that's another thing a family has to go through with that kind of stress. So it was a crisis overall, but I feel like it's not as big as people realize it was. I think people know, but I don't know how to explain it. It definitely was a big thing, but I think people moving and kind of working out that way kind of helped a little bit, in a way.
Last question.
Okay, so this is going to be our last question for you. And the question is, in your opinion, what steps of action could improve the housing situation / crisis in your community and globally?
I feel like globally is so big. So I'm going to start with the U.S. just because honestly, right? Globally is so big. I feel like, especially in America in general, they always want to do something outside. Like, help your people first. Like, we are struggling right here, and there's a problem. I feel like New York City, I feel like one step they did take was putting vouchers for upstate New York. That's one way to kind of do it, to get people out. I think before they officially put out that program, it was a start already with the quotes. Y'all can't see me. Is that they need to make sure people, wherever they put people, place was actually livable. It can't be a place where there has no jobs or no schools or stuff like that. If people go there, it has to have a mall. You have to have a place to like get food, get clothes, get those things. If it's not that, people cannot be able to live there. So I think they need to make sure wherever they put these places and people, they need to have environments they can actually be good in. I think they need to also work on the welfare thing in particular, that people who are, they think middle class, especially in this times, middle class people, we're struggling. We really struggle. You might think that, oh my gosh, it's middle class, you're upper middle class. It's not the greatest. Like, the money is not going because the money is not going up, but the prices of everything else is going up. So I think making sure that the eligibility for welfare, that people who are middle class, even people who are single with middle class, because people say like when you have children you get more, which is true. When you're a single person, you have nobody else to kind of get money from in that area, you're going to struggle even more in that to get money and things like that and survive. So I think they need to get the eligibility problems for like welfare to be a little bit better, to make sure people who are even higher income as they might think, especially for like New York City, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, places like those where the cost of income, like the cost of living actually is higher compared to a smaller town. Which honestly, even people out here in smaller towns, the rents are crazy too, but also minimum wage is also lower there. So it's just like they're trying to do a balance. I think especially for New York City, they need to change I want to say the BMI of how they consider certain areas. Like example, certain areas can go over a certain, I want to say, level for rent, but I think they use, from what I understand, the 5 boroughs plus like Rochester, like places where I feel like should not be included because their income is usually more than a regular New Yorker. And if you get a person who's like 100,000, 200,000 in the market, most people in New York City on average might not even make over $50,000. You cannot compare it to a person who's making 100K or 200K because it's not the same income bracket. We got to make sure we make the stuff livable for people. People cannot pay rent, $3,000-$4,000 a month, and they make $50,000 a year. This doesn't add up. It's either somebody going to start getting like either stealing more stuff because they have to survive, or it's just not going to work out. So I think they need to make more programs for everybody who's on this, in my mind, 100K, to make sure they can be able to survive, especially in New York City, because it's honestly so hard. I make more money than I did ever in my life, but I'm still struggling, and I live in NYCHA. That tells you a lot. If I'm living in NYCHA with only take 30% of what I'm making, and I'm barely making it, I can't imagine a person who's living in regular apartment buildings who got to buy their own food, own this, own that, and plus pay rent. It doesn't make sense. So I think that's one way they have to actually look at the people who are living in those areas and really see where they could actually fill in. I think what it is also, New York City has the most resources, whether it's housing, disability, things like that. But the problem is that we're not using it wisely, and we don't have the systems done properly. It's not overlapping properly. One person could have a mental illness problem, they could have a homeless problem, they could have this problem, but they have to go so far to find the resources to help them oneself. It needs to be more stuff in communities to help like that one person, instead of them going to the Bronx to get this help, going to Queens to get this help. If you get people where they actually are and help them where they are, they flourish better instead of have to go chaotic just to find everything they need. And the waiting times for these things also have to be much like faster. I had a foster kid, and to get services for her was like 6-7 months, and I'm like, this child can hardly walk and hardly speak properly. Why is this baby waiting so long? But it's because the system is so backed up. They say they can't find people, but people out here are looking for jobs. So it's like something has to be true. It's either you really can't find people, or you need to go to these colleges, universities where people are getting these degrees and put them in these jobs so they can help the people that they need to be helping for. So I think we need to really look at the system and really think about, like, is the system how we have it right now broken down? And it is. That's the answer to that question. And how can we help make it go faster? How can we make technology help us a little bit faster? Because even with the HRA problem, how we giving paperwork and stuff like that, it's faster than it used to be, but it's still a hot mess. It doesn't make sense to me. I think they just need to just take out, honestly, some of the vouchers and make them all Section 8 vouchers. So if people do want to leave New York City, they can, because Section 8 vouchers can go in anywhere in the U.S. basically resides. But City FEPS, is cute, and FEPS is cute, but they're only using New York City and New York in general. How's that helping somebody who wants to get more space for their kids? If they have like 7, 8 kids, most people don't have that, probably like 2 or 3, let's be honest. But if they want to have more space, they can't get that in New York City. They have to move out of New York or go upstate. And most vouchers that they have only made for that area, it's not made for outside of the place. So I think having a voucher that anybody can actually live on sustainably and live in other places they would like to live. Maybe a person living in New York, but they have family in Florida. That's a better support system in Florida, but they're only out here because something happened and they end up going home or something like that. So I think that's kind of a way that the country can help, and definitely use people with lived experience to kind of get them ahead with that. I feel like a lot of times people who make these decisions are people who are not lived experience, so they just make all these decisions for people they know nothing actually about. They want to do stuff for homelessness, but you've never been homeless, never been housing insecure, never lived on a couch. I'm not saying that people don't have empathy and could understand it, but until you actually understand like the nitty gritty or talk to a person who actually lived these struggles, you cannot possibly put something in place that's actually going to help majority of the people. Granted, everything that you do is not going to help everybody who you're trying to work for, but it should at least try to help at least 90 to 95% of people that you're actually trying to do the system for. So, yeah.
Hey guys, this is the host K Did. This is Hear Our Voices, where we tell stories, give resources, and change the narrative of homelessness. If you want to follow us, you can follow us on all our social media platforms. And also, if you want to tell a story, you can definitely DM us anytime. I'm always available. To be honest, I'm always available to do interviews too. And we would love to hear your story. We would also like to have a resource added to our resource packet. Our resource packet is definitely linked in a LinkedIn every single episode to make sure if you need resources, if you need help, if you think of anything that you know you can give somebody else, that would be a place to do it. I hope these episodes are helpful to anybody that you know or to yourself. And we thank you so much for supporting us. Sit back and relax and listen to our next podcast. Bye.